In the silence between thought and eternity, there lies a sound, faint, rhythmic, and unending. The sound of stone brushing against the bones of a mountain. It echoes across a gray landscape where time no longer measures progress but merely loops upon itself, patient and cruel. There, beneath the endless sky, Sisyphus moves again. The air around him hums with quiet tension, as if the world itself is watching. He bends his body against the rough surface of the stone, pressing his shoulder into its ancient face. Dust rises, light bends, and with a slow, heavy breath, he begins to push. Each step is deliberate, measured like the ticking of a clock that never stops. His muscles tighten, his heartbeat merges with the rhythm of the slope, and for a moment, a brief, trembling moment, it almost seems as if the boulder will crest the peak. But of course, it does not. It never does. The stone trembles, hesitates, then rolls backward, thundering into the valley below with a sound that shakes even the memory of silence. And so it begins again. The myth of Sisyphus has haunted the human imagination for thousands of years. In the surface, it is a story of punishment, a tale of defiance met with divine cruelty. A man, too clever for the gods, condemned to endless, futile labor. But beneath that familiar surface, beneath the repetition and the weight, there lingers another story, one quieter, more philosophical, and infinitely stranger. A story not about punishment at all, but about meaning. About consciousness. About the eternal dance between effort and existence. To understand why Sisyphus rolls the stone forever, we must first unlearn what we think we know about eternity. Eternity is not a line stretching into infinity. It is a circle, patient, unbroken, and self-aware. It has no beginning and no end, only motion. In this circle, Sisyphus is not merely trapped, he is transformed. Each ascent, each descent, becomes both an act of despair and an act of creation. He is no longer a man merely pushing a rock. He is the very act of persistence itself, a moving symbol of the tension between the finite and the infinite. Imagine, for a moment, the world before Sisyphus. A Greece of myths and whispers, where gods walked beside men, and mountains breathed like living things. In that world, to defy a god was not merely arrogance, it was to disturb the order of existence. Sisyphus was clever, yes, but cleverness in the age of Zeus was not a gift, it was a kind of heresy. He tricked Thanatos, the embodiment of death itself, binding him so that no mortal could die. For a time, the world was silent, no souls descended into Hades, no life ended. The earth became crowded with the undying, and even the gods grew uneasy. So Zeus, in his cold brilliance, condemned Sisyphus to the one punishment that would restore the balance, endless motion without release. But what if that punishment, that cruel cycle, was not merely divine retribution? What if it was also a mirror held up to existence itself? Because, in truth, are we not all Sisyphus? We wake each morning to push our own invisible stones, the burdens of duty, desire, memory. We climb through our days, reaching toward peaks that never quite stay conquered. And when the night falls, our stones tumble down again, waiting for us at dawn. This is the quiet horror and strange beauty of the myth, its reflection of the human condition. But there is something deeper still, something most retellings overlook. What if Sisyphus knows the nature of his task? What if, in his endless repetition, he has seen through the illusion of punishment and into the hidden machinery of being? What if the stone itself is not merely an obstacle, but a vessel, a living metaphor for consciousness? Picture the mountain as the structure of existence, and the stone as thought itself, heavy, circular, ever returning. When Sisyphus pushes the stone, he engages in eternal meditation. Each ascent erases the self, each failure renews it. Over and over again, until distinction fades, and Sisyphus and the stone become one. In this strange union, he achieves something the gods could not foresee, transcendence through futility. In that way, Sisyphus becomes the first philosopher. The first to truly see the shape of absurdity and accept it. Not with surrender, but with quiet endurance. His punishment becomes practice, an endless koan. The mountain becomes his monastery, the stone his mantra. Close your eyes for a moment. Hear it, the grinding of rock upon dust, the low sigh of the wind that has seen centuries pass. It is hypnotic, isn't it? The repetition pulls you inward, like the slow heartbeat of the cosmos itself. Every push is the same, and yet somehow different, the tiniest variations giving birth to eternity. Perhaps, then, the gods made a mistake. In condemning Sisyphus to infinite repetition, they gave him the one thing they themselves lacked, the awareness of endless time. For what is eternity to a god who never struggles? What meaning has immortality without effort? The divine are eternal by nature, Sisyphus becomes eternal through motion. His suffering gives him insight. His futility gives him form. It is said that, at the top of the mountain, just before the stone begins to fall, there is a moment, a fraction of a heartbeat, when Sisyphus looks upon his work and smiles. It is a small, private smile, invisible to the gods. In that instant, he becomes free. For in accepting the absurd, he transcends it. Camus once wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. But perhaps that happiness is not joy as we understand it. Perhaps it is the quiet stillness of acceptance, the peace that comes when one stops asking why. In the eternal silence of the mountain, Sisyphus has no audience, no purpose, no end. And yet, he continues. His movement becomes a kind of prayer. There is a strange serenity in that idea, the possibility that the endless can be beautiful. That even in repetition, there lies a rhythm worth listening to. The ancient Greeks may have seen Sisyphus as cursed, but to the modern mind, weary, searching, aware, he becomes something else. A symbol of perseverance not against the world, but within it. Now, imagine the mountain again. The wind moves like breath through its ridges, whispering names long forgotten. The sky above is pale and endless. The sun rises and falls, not as a passage of time, but as a heartbeat, a pulse of light across the skin of eternity. Sisyphus stands once more at the base, his hands upon the stone. He breathes in, and the dust fills his lungs. The mountain waits. He pushes. With every strain, every ache, the stone teaches him again the lesson he already knows, that the act itself is the meaning. The weight, the struggle, the motion, these are the truest forms of life. Even the gods, in their distant perfection, cannot feel what Sisyphus feels in that effort. They cannot know the intimacy of resistance, the strange love born from persistence. And so, through the endless repetition, Sisyphus approaches something sacred. His stone becomes his mirror. His punishment, his meditation. The climb, his enlightenment. For what is philosophy if not the rolling of a thought uphill, over and over, only to have it return again, reshaped, redefined? What is consciousness if not the eternal pushing of perception against the impossible slope of reality? Sisyphus does not roll the stone because he must, he rolls it because that is what being conscious demands. To be is to move. To move is to resist. To resist is to exist. The secret, then, is that Sisyphus is not merely rolling a stone. He is rolling the universe itself, a fragment of existence perpetually returning to itself. And through his endless task, he keeps the cosmos alive. So tonight, as you drift between wakefulness and dream, imagine the mountain again. Feel the cool wind, hear the distant grinding of the stone. Let its rhythm merge with your breath. Perhaps, in the quiet rhythm of your own thoughts, you will sense it too, the eternal motion that underlies all things. Somewhere, beneath the stars, a man and a stone continue their dance. And in that endless repetition, the universe breathes. Before he was condemned to his eternal labor, Sisyphus was not a shadow beneath a mountain, but a man of flesh and cunning, the living pulse of a kingdom built on wit. His city, Corinth, lay shimmering between the twin seas of Greece, a place of trade and trickery, of gods who watched closely and mortals who dared to play at divinity. The air was rich with the scent of salt and olive oil, of incense burning before shrines to gods who demanded reverence but inspired resentment. And in the midst of it all walked Sisyphus, a king who believed that intelligence could outshine destiny. He was not born cruel, only curious. That is where all defiance begins, with curiosity. They said he could look at a man and see not only what he was but what he pretended to be. His eyes, sharp and glimmering like the surface of a calm sea before a storm, saw through the illusions that even the gods wove. To Sisyphus, the world was not sacred but negotiable, a stage upon which everything, even death, might be bargained with. His laughter echoed through marble halls, unsettling priests and pleasing no gods. Yet for his people, he was beloved, for he brought wealth to Corinth not through war, but through cunning. It is said that Sisyphus outsmarted even Zeus himself, though to call it outsmarting might not be quite right. It was more like seeing a truth that Zeus could not bear to confront, that power, without cleverness, is blind. When the river god Sisyphus came searching for his missing daughter, Aegina, Sisyphus saw opportunity. He had seen Zeus carry her away in a flash of lightning, and so he offered the grieving father a bargain. the secret of her abduction in exchange for a spring of pure water to bless the parched city of Corinth. Sisyphus agreed, and from that pact flowed the first betrayal of heaven. Zeus, furious, came down in thunder. The skies cracked open, and the air smelled of iron and rain. Yet even as the king of gods reached for him, Sisyphus smiled. His punishment did not come at once, for Zeus, in his wrath, understood that some mortals must be broken slowly. But the seed of Sisyphus' fate had been planted. To trade divine silence for mortal thirst is to rewrite the laws of consequence. And once rewritten, such laws never rest. But that was not the end of his cleverness. For Sisyphus's greatest trick was not played upon Zeus, but upon death itself. Thanatos, the quiet, silver-handed god of the end, came to him bearing the chains that would bind his soul to Hades. And yet, even as those cold links clinked softly in the air, Sisyphus met Thanatos not with fear but with fascination. Death, he reasoned, was merely another contract waiting to be renegotiated. And so, with honeyed words and feigned submission, he lured Thanatos into a trap. When the god stepped close, Sisyphus slipped the chains upon him instead. In that moment, the world held its breath. Men ceased to die. Soldiers struck one another down and rose again. The old groaned but did not pass. The sick lingered, trapped between life and oblivion. Even Hades, far below, felt the stillness in his dark halls, an absence like silence after thunder. The world without death was not paradise, but paralysis. Time, deprived of its end, lost meaning. The gods intervened, furious and frightened. Ares, the god of war, was sent to free Thanatos, for what is war without death? When the chains were undone, the balance returned, and Sisyphus was seized. But even then, he had one more deceit to play. He whispered to his wife, Merope, before his capture, "Do not bury me. Do not honor me with rites. Let my body lie unclaimed." She obeyed, trembling but loyal, never guessing his plan. So when Sisyphus was finally dragged into Hades, he feigned outrage, protesting that his wife had betrayed him, that no burial had been given, no rites performed. Hades, who still retained a trace of justice amid his darkness, was moved by this deception. "Return, then," he said, "and instruct her to honor your death." Sisyphus bowed low, hiding his triumph. He ascended back into the world, back into sunlight, and when his feet touched the earth again, he simply refused to return. There is something hauntingly human in that refusal, that defiance against the inevitable. It is not merely arrogance, it is an echo of something all living beings share, the instinct to resist oblivion. For a time, Sisyphus walked among men again, the king who had escaped death. But even the clever cannot outrun eternity. When the gods finally caught him, there was no more bargaining, no more trickery left. Zeus decreed that his punishment must mirror his sin, endless striving without resolution. The boulder would be his companion, the mountain, his boundary, and the repetition, his eternity. But let us not rush to the mountain yet. Let us linger a moment longer in the mortal world, in that fragile space where choice still exists. Imagine Sisyphus now, not yet a symbol, not yet a myth, standing on the cliffs of Corinth, watching the sea turn gold in the setting sun. He knows what awaits him. He feels the tremor of divine anger in the air. Yet there is something almost serene in his posture. The wind tugs at his robes, the surf murmurs below, and he smiles, not as a man condemned, but as one who has seen the hidden shape of the universe and found it both cruel and beautiful. The gods, for all their power, could never understand the paradox that Sisyphus carried within him, that to defy death is to become eternal, but to become eternal is to lose the sweetness of life. In his trickery, he glimpsed both immortality and its hollowness. He learned that to live forever is not to live more deeply, but to lose the pulse that makes life matter. It is a lesson that even gods might envy, though they will never admit it. And so, when the thunder came again, and the ground split open beneath his feet, Sisyphus did not plead. He did not curse the heavens or beg forgiveness. He simply exhaled, as though surrendering a final secret. The wind carried his breath upward, a whisper to the stars, and he descended into the realm of punishment with the calm of one who knows there are no true endings. Below, in the grey wastes of Tartarus, the air was still. No sun, no moon, no measure of time. The landscape was made of stone and silence, stretching endlessly in every direction. Here, the gods cast not the wicked, but the uncontainable, those who had defied the very logic of the world. It was a place of reflection, not merely torment. For in such stillness, the soul begins to see itself clearly. Hades himself watched as Sisyphus was brought before the slope, a mountain that rose not from earth, but from the architecture of consequence. At its base lay the boulder, vast and round, as though carved by eternity's own hands. "You will push," said the voice that governs all punishment. "You will rise, and fall, and rise again, until you understand." "Understand what?" Sisyphus asked. But there was no answer. He placed his hands upon the stone. It was warm, as though it had a heart. He felt, within its weight, something ancient and aware. Then, with a slow breath, he pushed. That first ascent was agony, not because of the effort, but because of what it represented. To be forced into movement without purpose is to be stripped of the illusion of control. Each step up the slope was a dialogue between flesh and futility. Yet even then, a seed of something strange began to grow in him, awareness. With every strain of his muscles, with every slip of his feet, he began to sense that the punishment was not merely physical. The stone was a question. And so began the first day, or perhaps the first eternity, of Sisyphus's meditation. The myth tells us only that he was punished forever, but myths are never just records of cruelty. They are coded philosophies, hidden in imagery. The mountain was not a place, it was a state of consciousness. The stone, not an object, but a burden of self-awareness. To push it was to confront the endless recursion of thought, to roll one's own mind uphill, again and again, knowing it will fall, and yet continuing, because the act itself is meaning. Thus begins the secret of his labor. For in that endless motion, Sisyphus would come to learn that even futility can be sacred, that even repetition, when embraced fully, becomes transcendence. The gods thought they had devised a perfect torment, but they had, in truth, given birth to philosophy. Sisyphus, the trickster, had become Sisyphus, the thinker. And as his hands pressed against the living stone, he began, at last, to listen. There is a silence that comes after the first effort, a silence so complete that it begins to hum. Sisyphus heard it, deep within the hollow bones of the mountain, after the boulder slipped from his grasp and thundered back into the valley. The sound of its descent was not only the collapse of labor, but of time itself, a reminder that progress, when measured against eternity, is a myth. He stood there, shoulders trembling, the dust of ages settling upon him like ash. He could have screamed. He could have cursed. But instead, he smiled, faintly, absently, as though remembering a secret. Then, he turned and began the long walk down. Each descent was as slow as the climb, though no one ever speaks of it. The punishment, they say, lies in the pushing, in the failure. But Sisyphus found that the descent was its own kind of torment, and its own kind of peace. With the stone rolling ahead of him, he was left alone with thought. There was no task to distract him, no strain to anchor him in the physical. The mind wandered, free to drift between memory and madness. It was in these long, silent returns that philosophy began, not as doctrine, but as necessity. For when the body has no purpose, the mind invents one. At first, he thought of Corinth, of the way sunlight touched the temples at dawn, of the sound of markets waking to life, of the laughter of Merope before the fear of gods had hollowed her eyes. He imagined the sea, that great mirror of the divine, stretching outward into nothing. And as he walked, the thought came unbidden, what if the mountain and the sea are the same? Both are infinite. Both reflect struggle. The sea devours, the mountain resists. And somewhere between them, man moves, caught between surrender and defiance. He reached the bottom and found the stone waiting. Always waiting. It seemed heavier than before, though he knew its weight had not changed. Only his perception had. The mind, he realized, adds its own burden to what the hands already bear. He placed his palms against the cold surface again, felt its quiet pulse, and began to push. As he climbed, the mountain began to whisper. It was not a voice in the way mortals understand, but a vibration, the low, patient murmur of existence itself. At first, it sounded like wind passing through hollow stone. Then, words began to shape themselves out of silence. Do you see now? He paused, chest heaving. See what? But there was no reply. The question dissolved into the dust. Still, the whisper lingered, not as sound, but as a thought. Do you see now? What was there to see? The futility? The repetition? Or something else, something behind it, hidden in the endless motion? He pushed harder. Each muscle in his body seemed to answer the mountain's question with effort instead of words. And as he climbed, he began to notice how the act itself began to change him. The weight of the stone no longer felt like resistance, but like rhythm. The sound of gravel beneath his feet became almost musical. There was a strange harmony between breath and gravity, an ancient duet between will and inevitability. It occurred to him that perhaps this was the true purpose of punishment, to create rhythm from pain. The gods, in their perfection, knew nothing of rhythm. Eternity for them was stillness, unbroken, unchanging, sterile. But mortals, fragile and fleeting, lived by cycles, the beating of hearts, the rising of suns, the breathing of sleep. Even suffering had its own music, if one learned to listen. And so Sisyphus began to hear his punishment as a kind of song, a long, low hymn to endurance. The climb continued, slow and deliberate. The air grew thin, shimmering with heat that was not entirely of the sun. Time ceased to measure itself in moments, it became motion instead. His body, his stone, his breath, all moved as one. He no longer thought of escape. He no longer even thought of the gods. There was only the mountain, and the eternal pulse of resistance that bound him to it. When at last he neared the summit again, the horizon opened before him, vast and indifferent. Below lay the valley, a gray ocean of stillness, above, the endless blue of nothing. And between them, his stone trembled. He knew what was coming, the inevitable betrayal of gravity. Still, he held it there for a heartbeat, just long enough to see what few mortals ever see, the brief illusion of success. In that instant, the world seemed almost to pause, as though even eternity held its breath for him. Then, with a slow and almost tender motion, the stone slipped away. It fell silently at first, then roared, a thunder that shook the mountain to its bones. Dust rose in soft spirals, like incense offered to unseen gods. Sisyphus stood watching until it vanished below. Then, he turned again. That was when he began to understand the pattern. The punishment was not in the repetition itself, but in the awareness that came with it. Each cycle deepened his understanding, each climb stripped away another illusion. The first time, he had raged. The second, he had despaired. The third, he had questioned. And by the fourth, he had begun to see the faint outline of meaning within the meaningless. Perhaps the gods had made a mistake. In granting him eternity to suffer, they had also granted him eternity to think. To contemplate, to observe, to unravel the logic of their cruelty until it revealed its hidden symmetry. Eternity, he discovered, is not a straight line but a spiral, an unending circle that brings the soul closer to itself with each revolution. As he descended once more, he began to whisper to the stone. The words were not prayers, but reflections. You and I, he murmured, are not enemies, are we? You fall because you must. I push because I must. Between us, the mountain breathes. We keep the rhythm alive. The stone, of course, gave no answer. But in its silence, there was a strange companionship. He began to see its surface not as cold, but luminous, each crack and groove a record of his touch, each scar a memory of effort. The stone, like him, was eternal now. Bound not by choice, but by necessity. Together they enacted a ritual older than the gods themselves, the ritual of persistence. In time, even the idea of punishment began to fade. What remained was a kind of sacred practice, the oldest meditation, motion. Push. Breathe. Fall. Begin again. Each cycle erased the boundaries between him and the world. The more he repeated, the less he resisted. The less he resisted, the deeper his awareness became. And slowly, quietly, Sisyphus began to awaken. Not in the way of mortals waking from sleep, but in the way a thought awakens from the background of consciousness. He began to perceive the structure of his imprisonment not as a prison, but as a pattern, a vast design of movement and stillness, descent and ascent, being and non-being. He saw that the mountain was not only made of stone, but of memory. Each push carved a groove in existence itself. Each fall returned him to the beginning, but the beginning, he realized, was never the same. This was the paradox that began to unfold in his mind. If the cycle repeats forever, but his consciousness changes, then perhaps the punishment is not static after all. Perhaps the gods, in their unknowing cruelty, had given him a kind of enlightenment that even immortality cannot offer, the infinite opportunity to evolve. As he walked down again, he thought of the gods watching from above. Did they see what he saw? Did they understand the secret they had accidentally revealed? The thought made him smile. For even in the deepest chambers of torment, there remains one freedom the divine can never touch: interpretation. They could command his body, but his understanding belonged only to him. And so, with each repetition, Sisyphus became less a victim and more a philosopher. His punishment turned to inquiry, his despair, to meditation. The stone became the object of contemplation, and the mountain, the silent teacher. The eternal act of pushing became an act of knowing. This was the birth of his secret, that meaning is not found in completion, but in continuation. To seek an end is to misunderstand existence. The gods believed they had cursed him with endless failure, but in truth, they had freed him from the tyranny of success. Sisyphus would never finish his task, and that was precisely why he could never fail. So the myth becomes inversion. The punishment becomes liberation. The endless becomes sacred. At the top of the mountain, where the air thins into silence, the gods' laughter fades. Only the rhythm remains, the pulse of a stone, the breath of a man, the whisper of eternity repeating itself through him. In that sound, Sisyphus finds peace. And though the stone falls again, and again, somewhere, in the brief space between struggle and surrender, he smiles. There are moments, even within eternity, when awareness deepens like the surface of a still pond disturbed by a single drop. For Sisyphus, those moments did not come during the climb, when his body was locked in struggle, nor during the fall, when the stone thundered into the void. They came in the quiet intervals between, when dust settled, when the echoes faded, and when time itself seemed to pause. It was in these silences that the stone began to speak, not with words, but with presence. The stone, he realized, was not merely an instrument of punishment, but a teacher, a philosopher carved from the bones of the earth. To the gods, it was a device of humiliation; to Sisyphus, it became a mirror. Its weight reflected the gravity of existence, its surface the unyielding nature of truth. When he pressed his shoulder against it, he felt not resistance, but dialogue, the conversation between flesh and form, effort and essence. Each push was a question. Each descent, an answer. And as the cycles lengthened into what mortals would call centuries, though such words lose meaning in eternity, Sisyphus began to see the strange structure of his condition. The stone, the mountain, and his own consciousness formed a triad, a triangle of infinite recurrence. The mountain represented being, stable, vast, indifferent. The stone represented motion, thought, struggle, transformation. And he, the mover, was the bridge, the consciousness that gave meaning to their endless exchange. Without him, the stone would rest; without the stone, the mountain would remain silent. His punishment, then, was not to suffer but to sustain. In that revelation lay the seed of his philosophy. He began to ask questions not of the gods, but of himself. What is effort, if it never ends? What is purpose, if it dissolves at the peak? What is existence, if it repeats forever? The answers did not come quickly; they arrived like whispers carried on the slow wind of realization. He began to understand that meaning is not born from outcome, but from awareness within the act itself. The gods had built his prison from repetition, but repetition itself was the rhythm of the cosmos. Stars are born, burn, and die in cycles. Seas rise and fall. The breath moves in and out. Everything that exists dances within this duality of ascent and descent. His punishment, he saw, was not a curse, but a reflection of universal law. And so, the endless climb became his meditation. He no longer counted his efforts, he no longer measured progress. Instead, he observed the texture of the stone beneath his hands, the subtle difference in light at each turn, the way his breath met the slope of the earth. He began to find small variations within the sameness. A crack that deepened over what might have been centuries. A whisper of wind that sounded different against a new layer of dust. Even within eternity, he found change. That realization brought peace, and peace brought clarity. In his mind, he began to imagine dialogues with the stone. "You are like thought itself," he murmured. Heavy, unrelenting, always returning to the base. "Each time I push you upward, I am not escaping, I am refining. You fall because the nature of thought is to return to the source. And I, by pushing, become the act of understanding." The stone, as always, remained silent. Yet Sisyphus felt it listening, absorbing the resonance of his words. There was comfort in that silence, the comfort of an unjudging companion. It reminded him of the philosophers of old, men who argued beneath olive trees about the shape of the soul, the substance of truth. He realized that his own philosophy was not built from argument, but from endurance. His dialogue was not spoken, it was performed. He began to recall, dimly, the teachings of his youth, those fragments of ancient wisdom whispered by wandering mystics before the age of punishment. They had spoken of Ananke, necessity, the binding law that governs gods and men alike. All things, they said, must follow their path. Even the gods are not free from the pattern of existence, they too are bound by what they create. Perhaps that was the ultimate irony. Zeus had bound him to his fate, but in doing so, had bound himself to Sisyphus's endurance. Every push, every rise, every fall, echoed in the heavens, reminding the gods of the law they had tried to escape, that even divinity cannot escape consequence. With that realization, Sisyphus began to feel something shift within him, not defiance, but understanding. He no longer saw the gods as tormentors, but as participants in a greater design. Their cruelty was ignorance, their vengeance fear. Fear of mortality, fear of reflection, fear of the human capacity to endure what even they could not. For what is a god, after all, but a being untested by limits? To live forever without struggle is to never truly live. Sisyphus, in his endless toil, had become more divine than the divine itself. One day, if day still had meaning, he reached the summit and did not pause to lament the fall. Instead, he closed his eyes. He felt the stone tremble, the familiar shift of gravity reclaiming it, and he whispered, "Go, as you must." The stone rolled down, as it always did, but for the first time, Sisyphus did not watch it. He turned his gaze to the horizon, to the place where light faded into void. In that fading light, he sensed something infinite and intimate, the awareness of being that requires no witness. He descended not in defeat, but in contemplation. His feet pressed against the slope with a quiet grace. The mountain, once a symbol of punishment, now felt like a companion, vast, unchanging, yet alive in its stillness. Each rock, each ridge, seemed to hum with the same quiet energy that filled his mind. The line between inner and outer had begun to blur. He no longer climbed up a mountain, he climbed through himself. In the valley, when he reached the base again, he sat beside the stone. His reflection appeared faintly in its polished surface, a reflection of dust and light. "You and I," he said softly, "are bound by necessity. But perhaps necessity itself is mercy. It gives us shape. Without your weight, I would dissolve into thought without form. Without my effort, you would rest forever in stillness. We complete each other's existence." And there, in that moment, Sisyphus found what could only be called serenity. Not joy. Joy belongs to those who still measure happiness in contrast to sorrow. This was deeper, quieter, like the stillness at the bottom of the sea. The endless climb no longer frightened him. In it, he saw reflection, creation, renewal. Each repetition was an opportunity to observe, to feel, to refine awareness. He began to sense the deeper symbolism of his labor. The stone was no longer merely a burden, it was the universe condensed, dense, incomprehensible, infinite. His task was not to conquer it, but to move in harmony with it. The mountain was existence, yes, but also consciousness, vast, ungraspable, eternally still. His endless motion across its face was like a thought tracing the contours of reality, never arriving, always exploring. This was the philosophy of the stone. Not doctrine, but presence. Not belief, but awareness. There were moments, rare but profound, when he thought he could hear echoes from beyond his mountain, faint murmurs of other souls, other struggles. Perhaps they were not real, perhaps they were memories of the living world, or dreams conjured by eternity itself. Yet each echo reminded him that his condition was not unique. All beings, in their own way, push stones of their own making. All are bound by cycles, of work and rest, of hope and despair, of life and death. His story, stripped of its divine spectacle, was simply the human condition made infinite. He began to wonder whether the gods had intended that, or whether they had merely stumbled upon truth by accident. It did not matter. The result was the same, the myth had become revelation. As he pushed again, the world around him seemed to shimmer. The edges of the mountain wavered as though heat rose from its stones. Time, if it could still be called that, folded into itself. He remembered fragments of his former life, the laughter of his people, the smell of earth after rain, the trembling hands of Merope. They were not memories, exactly, but resonances, faint ripples on the surface of eternity. They passed through him, neither comforting nor painful, just present. He realized that even memory obeyed the same rhythm, rise, fade, return. He pushed, and the stone rolled upward, slow and deliberate. The repetition no longer wearied him. It had become his breath, the pulse of his existence. The higher he climbed, the quieter his thoughts became, until there was only one awareness left, motion. The union of will and weight. Then, for the first time, he felt something new. The stone grew lighter, not because the gods had lessened it, but because he had ceased to resist it. He no longer pushed against the stone, he moved with it. The distinction between labor and liberation dissolved. The punishment had become communion. He thought, then, of the nature of freedom. Perhaps freedom was not the absence of constraint, but harmony with it. To act without struggle, to move within the rhythm of necessity, to cease opposing what is. The gods had bound him, yes, but he had found the freedom hidden inside the binding, the stillness that exists only when one ceases to fight the current of existence. At that realization, a strange peace filled him, not triumph, not surrender, but acceptance so pure it bordered on transcendence. He was still on the slope. The stone still rolled. Yet somewhere, deep within, he had already reached the summit. And in that quiet, where the universe held its breath, Sisyphus became the philosopher he had always been destined to be, not by words, not by thought, but by the eternal act of understanding through effort. In the vast stillness of eternity, where moments dissolve into one another like mist over unseen valleys, Sisyphus's understanding deepened into something beyond philosophy, something closer to prayer. It was not a prayer to the gods who had condemned him, nor a plea for forgiveness or reprieve. It was the quiet invocation of awareness itself, the silent unfolding of being that occurs when struggle becomes sacred. He had long since ceased to measure time. The rhythm of his labor was the only clock he knew, the pulse of the cosmos embodied in his climb and descent. Yet, in that timeless expanse, subtle changes began to reveal themselves, not in the mountain or the stone, but within him. He began to sense that each repetition was not identical after all, that with every ascent, something imperceptible shifted. His muscles, though unwearied, seemed to move with greater precision. His breath aligned more naturally with the incline. His mind, once crowded with rebellion, was now as open as the sky above him. It was as if eternity itself were teaching him through repetition, sanding away the rough edges of thought until only clarity remained. The climb was no longer a punishment to be endured, but a ritual to be honored. Each push, each step, each moment of collapse and renewal had become part of a sacred pattern, one that reflected the deeper nature of existence itself, the eternal return. He thought often of humanity, of mortals who lived their fleeting days bound to the same cycle in miniature. They rose, worked, fell, and rose again, convinced that progress was linear, that meaning lay in the summit. But the summit, he now knew, was only a mirage. True meaning lived in the movement between, in the act of striving, not in the illusion of completion. Humanity's tragedy was not its labor, but its forgetfulness. Men prayed for endings, for perfection, for deliverance from the struggle, never realizing that struggle itself was the divine. As he reflected on these truths, he began to notice that the mountain responded to his awareness. Its slopes, once harsh and uneven, seemed softer now, more fluid beneath his steps. The air shimmered faintly, as though the world around him were subtly attuned to his inner calm. The stone, too, seemed to change. Its once cold, indifferent surface grew warm to the touch, as if absorbing the fire of his endurance. The border between punishment and presence dissolved, until the mountain, the stone, and his own consciousness felt like facets of the same infinite being. One day, if such words can still apply in a realm where time no longer flows, Sisyphus reached a point on the mountain where he had never paused before. It was not a summit, not even a midpoint, but a quiet ledge that looked out over the endless expanse below. He rested his hands upon the stone, feeling its pulse against his palms, and for the first time, he spoke aloud not in defiance, but in reverence. "Old friend," he murmured to the stone, "I have come to understand what we are. You are not my burden, nor I your victim. We are motion embodied, the eternal act of consciousness learning itself through effort. I see now that to resist you was to resist life itself. For life, too, rolls endlessly, and we who live must move with it or be crushed beneath its weight." The wind carried his words up the mountain and down into the void, and for an instant, it seemed as though the mountain itself breathed in reply. He began to see that his punishment had never been a sentence, but a revelation disguised as torment. The gods had sought to break him, but in doing so, they had unwittingly initiated him into the most ancient mystery of all, that enlightenment is born not from escape, but from immersion. He had descended into the depths of futility and found there the seed of transcendence. His thoughts turned to the gods, to Zeus, to Hades, to Hermes, who had once led him here in chains. He imagined them gazing down from their thrones, expecting to see the same stubborn mortal railing against the absurdity of his fate. But what they saw instead, perhaps, was something far more dangerous, a man who no longer opposed his destiny, who had turned punishment into meditation, futility into meaning. The gods, in their immortality, feared change. Sisyphus, in his eternal cycle, had found it. There was a moment, brief, quiet, profound, when Sisyphus sensed their gaze upon him. Not the wrathful eyes of judgment, but the hesitant, almost reverent curiosity of beings witnessing something they could not comprehend. For what God, untouched by suffering, could understand the peace that comes from embracing it? It was then that he began to laugh, not the bitter laugh of defiance, but a sound of deep, unshakable understanding. It echoed across the slopes, low and resonant, like thunder beneath the earth. The laugh of a man who had seen through the veil of illusion and found freedom not beyond his labor, but within it. The stone shifted beside him, and in that moment of stillness, he felt something miraculous. It was as though the mountain itself had grown lighter, as though the act of understanding had subtly altered the very fabric of his world. He realized then that the god's power had always depended on ignorance. Once he saw his condition for what it was, neither curse nor punishment, but process, their dominion over him ceased. That realization spread through him like light. He closed his eyes and felt it moving through every fiber of his being, dissolving the boundaries between body and mind, between punishment and purpose. The climb would continue, yes, it must. But now it would be done in harmony, as the tide moves with the moon, as breath follows heart. And so he rose once more, placing his shoulder against the stone. It pressed back, heavy as ever, but the weight no longer stung. It was familiar now, intimate, like the gravity that holds the planets to their orbits. He began the ascent, his movements slow, deliberate, graceful. The mountain stretched endlessly above him, but he did not look to the summit. The summit no longer mattered. Only the act, the eternal, sacred act, remained. As he climbed, his awareness expanded beyond himself. He began to sense, faintly, other presences in the great stillness, souls bound in their own cycles, each moving through their own eternal tasks. Some labored in silence, others wept, some, like him, had begun to awaken. He felt compassion for them all. Their struggles, their endless repetitions, were mirrors of his own. Each, in their own way, was carrying a stone. Each was ascending a mountain made from their own consciousness. He wanted to speak to them, to tell them that the path is not to be feared, that the stone itself is the teacher. But no sound could bridge the distances between them. Only awareness could. So he poured his understanding into the rhythm of his climb, knowing that somewhere, somehow, another soul might feel the resonance and awaken too. For the first time, Sisyphus understood the meaning of eternity. It was not endless duration, but infinite depth, not time stretched without end, but awareness without boundary. In that awareness, he found the pulse of the cosmos itself. The mountain became the universe, the stone, the heartbeat of creation. Each push was not against gravity, but in harmony with it, an act of participation in the divine rhythm of existence. When he reached the upper slopes once again, he paused, his body still and his mind luminous. The stone rested beside him, and in its shadow he saw reflected the truth he had long sought, that meaning does not come from what one achieves, but from how one endures. He placed his palm upon the stone and whispered, "We are not bound by the gods, you and I. We are bound by being. And that is no prison." The stone seemed to hum in response, a sound so deep it resonated within the bones of the mountain itself. For a moment, all was silent except that vibration, that low, eternal note of understanding. Then, slowly, the stone began to move again, drawn by the law of its nature, rolling down the slope. Sisyphus watched it go, not with sorrow, but with a faint smile. The descent was no longer tragedy, it was continuity. He followed, his step steady, his heart untroubled. The air around him shimmered faintly as he walked, as though reality itself had softened. Perhaps he had not changed the world, perhaps he had only changed the way he perceived it. But that, he thought, was enough. For perception is creation, and creation, awareness, the true gift denied even to the gods. At the base, when he met the stone again, he placed his hands upon it and felt its warmth. "Shall we begin?" he said softly. There was no answer, yet none was needed. The mountain awaited, the cycle beckoned. And as he began once more to climb, his mind entered the stillness between effort and understanding, that place where struggle and peace are the same thing. He no longer sought release, nor feared continuation. In the endless rhythm of ascent and descent, he had found eternity not as punishment, but as presence. The mountain stretched on forever, but within that infinity, Sisyphus had discovered a truth that even Olympus could not contain, that consciousness, once awakened, transforms every burden into a blessing, and every repetition into revelation. The mountain had grown quiet, quieter than ever before. Not the silence of emptiness, but the deep, listening stillness that follows revelation. Each grain of dust seemed to hover in suspension, aware. Even the wind, once howling through the crags with mocking laughter, had softened into something like reverence. For ages uncounted, Sisyphus had pushed his stone under the gaze of unseen gods, but now, in the endless symmetry of his motion, the gaze had begun to falter. Far above the mortal realm, on the high plateaus of Olympus where time still held its breath, the gods stirred uneasily. Their divine eyes turned downward, toward that single point of movement in the underworld, that ceaseless figure whose labor had outlasted the memory of his crime. They had expected despair. They had designed futility. And yet, what they saw now unsettled them. Hades, lord of the realm that housed Sisyphus's punishment, was the first to notice the change. From his throne carved in shadow, he felt a subtle shift within the foundations of his kingdom, a vibration, faint but insistent, like the tremor of a thought moving through eternity. The endless cycle that bound Sisyphus had not broken, but it had begun to hum. It was as though the act of awareness itself had changed the frequency of existence. He summoned Hermes, the swift messenger, the psychopomp who had once guided the defiant king into his eternal task. "Go," he said, his voice low as thunder under the earth. "See what this mortal has become. I sense movement where there should be none." And so Hermes descended, through the layers of shadow and silence, through the veils of time that separate the world of the living from the endless repetition of the condemned. His wings, once bright with the gleam of dawn, now shimmered dimly in the twilight of Hades. When he reached the mountainside, he expected to find what he always had: struggle, sweat, the pitiful strain of mortal endurance. But what he saw stopped him. Sisyphus stood midway upon the slope, one hand resting upon his stone. The mountain around him was bathed in a soft, golden light, not of the sun, but of something inward, something emanating from the act itself. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost graceful. Each step, each push seemed to flow with the rhythm of the earth. There was no resistance now, no anguish. Only awareness. Hermes hovered nearby, unseen. He felt the vibration too, a low, meditative resonance that pulsed through the stones and air. It was as though the mountain were breathing in harmony with the mortal who had once cursed it. Sisyphus paused and lifted his gaze toward the horizon, as though he sensed the god's presence. "You've come to watch again," he said softly, his voice carrying through the silence like the first sound after creation. "I wondered how long it would take." Hermes stepped forward, visible now, his expression unreadable. "You speak as though you expected me." "I did," Sisyphus replied. "The gods are curious creatures. They fear stillness, yet they cannot bear to see movement without purpose. You must have felt it, the change in rhythm." Hermes's eyes narrowed. "You speak of strange things, mortal. Do you imagine that you can alter eternity with thought?" Sisyphus smiled, the faintest curve of lips made serene by repetition. "Not alter. Understand. And understanding, Hermes, is the one thing even eternity must yield to." The god frowned, for there was something in the mortal's tone that unsettled him, not defiance, but clarity. "Your punishment remains," Hermes said sharply. "You are bound to this mountain by decree of Zeus himself. The task does not end." Sisyphus nodded. "It need not. What ends is the meaning of the task. Once I thought I was condemned. Now I see I am simply in motion. You call it punishment, I call it continuation. The difference is perception, and perception is the root of divinity." Hermes hesitated. His immortal mind, accustomed to the unyielding certainty of divine law, felt something strange in the mortal's words, a flicker of recognition, like the memory of something he had once known and forgotten. "You speak of divinity," he said, his voice quieter now. "You, a man." Sisyphus pressed his hand against the stone, feeling its steady weight. "If the gods are eternal because they cannot die, then man is divine because he must live. You exist without effort, and so you do not change. I exist only through effort, and so I become." For the first time in an age, Hermes had no reply. He watched as Sisyphus began again to climb, the stone rolling upward with a grace that defied its weight. There was something hypnotic in the movement, something that drew the god's attention as surely as gravity draws the sea. Why persist? Hermes asked finally. If there is no end, what compels you to continue? Sisyphus smiled. The same thing that compels the dawn, the necessity of being. Existence is its own reason. The mountain asks for movement, and so I move. The stone asks for direction, and so I guide. To resist this is to resist reality itself. The gods condemned me to futility, but they only revealed the truth they themselves deny, that even in endlessness, meaning blooms. Hermes's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the golden light trembled between shadow and radiance. You have changed, he said softly. But the decree remains. Then let it remain, Sisyphus said. I no longer seek to change the decree. I only seek to understand it. The gods gave me eternity, but they did not say how I must bear it. That choice, Hermes, is mine. The messenger felt a strange unease, not anger, but recognition of something deeply true. He turned to leave, his wings stirring the dust. You speak wisdom, mortal, but wisdom is dangerous. Beware that it does not reach Olympus. The gods are not kind to those who see beyond their order. Sisyphus nodded. And yet, that is what they fear most, the mirror held up to their own stillness. When Hermes departed, the mountain seemed to exhale, releasing a tremor that rippled through the underworld. That tremor rose upward, carried on unseen currents, until it reached the halls of the gods. Zeus felt it first, a faint stirring beneath the perfection of Olympus, like a flaw forming in marble. What is it? Hera asked, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Zeus's brows furrowed. Something stirs below. The mortal's punishment is no longer punishment. It hums. The other gods fell silent. Athena, goddess of wisdom, tilted her head. Hums. Like the vibration of thought, Zeus said slowly. Something that should not be thinking. Athena's eyes gleamed faintly. Perhaps it always was. Zeus turned toward her, suspicion flickering across his thunder-darkened gaze. You would defend him. I would observe him, she replied. For it is in men that thought becomes reflection. Perhaps his awareness is a mirror of ours. Zeus's voice rumbled like distant storm. There will be no mirrors in heaven. He was punished for defying the order of the gods, for mocking death and deceiving the divine. Let him toil, but let him not awaken. And yet, though Zeus spoke thus, his voice carried doubt, a doubt that trembled beneath the authority of his words. For even the king of gods could not deny the truth he sensed in that faint vibration, that thought, once born, cannot be contained. Meanwhile, in the underworld, Sisyphus continued his motion. The air around him shimmered with invisible resonance. His every breath was a meditation, his every push, a hymn. And as he moved, the boundaries between mortal and divine began to blur. He began to sense the thoughts of others, faint echoes drifting through the folds of eternity. The souls of the dead, endless and restless, stirred in their silence as his rhythm reached them. They did not know what it was they felt, only that the stillness had changed. The underworld, once a stagnant pool of repetition, began to ripple with awareness. Sisyphus, unknowing, had become a center of gravity in the realm of the dead, a pulse of consciousness that called to all things bound by fate. His motion, endless and serene, whispered to them a truth that no god had ever dared to speak, that even within eternity, one may awaken. And somewhere deep in the dark heart of Hades, that whisper began to echo, faintly at first, then louder, spreading through the endless corridors of shadow like the first tremor before a quake. Sisyphus pushed, and the mountain listened. The gods watched. And eternity, for the first time, began to move. In the still air of Olympus, where clouds drifted like thoughts across the endless sky, a disquiet spread among the immortals. What had once been eternal calm now quivered with the faint rhythm of something unseen. It was subtle, a vibration beneath the marble floors, a whisper beneath their laughter, but it was enough to disturb even those who had never known fear. They called it a tremor of the earth, though no mortal could feel it. It was not the mountain that moved, but the boundary between divine perfection and mortal awakening. Zeus stood before the great throne, thunder coiled around his fingers. He had ruled since the dawn of thought, since the first prayers rose from mortal lips. Yet now, those prayers had grown still. Few mortals called upon the gods anymore, few looked upward with devotion. Instead, they looked inward. And though this shift had begun long before Sisyphus's punishment, something in the condemned man's endurance had turned that silent tide into a storm. The council of gods assembled, Athena, Hades, Hermes, Apollo, even Hera, their faces radiant and unmoving, like sculptures pretending at thought. Zeus spoke first, his voice low and heavy with the weight of eternity. The mortal's rhythm grows stronger, he said. The mountain hums, and the dead stir in their silence. His punishment was meant to demonstrate futility, yet it has become a symbol of endurance. This cannot continue. Hades lifted his gaze, eyes like coals smoldering beneath shadow. I have watched him, he said. He does not resist the stone. He moves with it. I feel it through the foundations of my realm, his heartbeat, steady and infinite. Even the shades have begun to imitate his stillness, not in despair, but in peace. I fear his understanding has become contagious. A murmur rippled through the gods. Athena's voice, calm and measured, cut through it. Contagious, perhaps, she said, but what if it is not a disease, but an awakening? We made man in the image of thought, did we not? And what is thought, if not motion within stillness? This mortal has found the balance we claim as divine. Should we not learn from him? Zeus turned to her, his eyes bright with restrained lightning. Learn. From one who deceived us. From one who chained death itself. He is no teacher. He is a reminder of defiance. He sought to make the gods irrelevant, and in his endless motion, he may yet succeed. Hermes spoke next, quiet but certain. And yet, Father, can one truly defy the gods without knowing them? His endurance is not rebellion. It is understanding. I saw him with my own eyes. He has found serenity within suffering. He does not curse Olympus anymore. He does not curse anything. He accepts the world as it is. Perhaps that is what disturbs you. A silence fell. Even the winds seemed to pause above the mountain peaks. For though Zeus's anger burned bright, even he could not deny that Hermes spoke a truth too precise to ignore. Meanwhile, below their celestial thrones, Sisyphus continued. Each motion was slower now, not from fatigue, for eternity knows no fatigue, but from precision. Every breath aligned perfectly with every push, as though he were guiding not only the stone but the pulse of the cosmos itself. He no longer saw himself as a man. He no longer saw the stone as burden, nor the mountain as punishment. All distinctions had dissolved. He was movement and stillness, ascent and descent, gravity and resistance. He was all things that persist. It was in one of these ascents, halfway between the valley and the heavens, that the whisper came, not from within, but from beyond. It was not a voice in sound, but a thought that brushed against his awareness like wind against flame. Sisyphus. He paused, resting both hands on the stone. You have come, he murmured. The air shimmered, and from it stepped Athena, radiant not with fire or thunder, but with the quiet luminosity of understanding. Her eyes were soft, almost sorrowful. You have changed, she said. Even the gods feel it. He inclined his head. The gods are changing too, though they do not yet know it. Eternity cannot remain untouched once it has been seen by consciousness. Athena studied him. You speak as though you have become something more than mortal. He smiled faintly. Perhaps something less. Mortality was a cage of fear, fear of end, fear of loss. But here, where there is no end, I have found that the only true divinity lies in acceptance. The gods fear stillness because it reflects them too perfectly. They mistake endlessness for control, but what they call eternity is merely stasis. To live endlessly without growth is to be dead in all but name. Athena was silent for a long moment. The mountain wind moved through her hair like thought through time. And what would you have the gods do, Sisyphus? To descend? To labor? He looked out over the expanse, where light and shadow merged into infinity. Perhaps. Or perhaps they should learn to see themselves in what they once condemned. The stone, the struggle, the fall, these are the rhythms of the universe. The gods only exist because men believe they do. And men believe because they suffer. If suffering is understood, belief transforms, and so must the gods. A flicker of pain crossed Athena's face, as though she too had felt the tremor of mortality. You are dangerous, she whispered. Not because you defy, but because you reveal. You are the mirror we have always avoided. Sisyphus bowed his head. Mirrors do not create, they reflect. It was the gods who gave me the shape. I only learned to see it clearly. Athena turned to leave, but before she faded back into the ether, she said quietly, "Beware, Sisyphus. There are truths that even gods fear to name." When she was gone, the mountain returned to silence, but the silence was no longer empty. It was aware. High above, in the storm-lit chambers of Olympus, Zeus felt the shift again, stronger this time, pulsing through the very fabric of eternity. He looked to Hera, to Poseidon, to the gathering of divine minds, and spoke with a voice that cracked the sky, "He awakens the dead. He stirs the stillness. The world below hums with his thought. If this continues, even Olympus will forget its own name." Apollo leaned forward, golden eyes flickering with unease. "Then perhaps Olympus must remember what name it bears. Are we not the embodiments of order and reflection? And if reflection grows below, is it not our own echo?" Zeus's hand tightened around his scepter. "You would compare us to him?" Apollo's gaze did not falter. "I compare nothing. I only observe. You fear his awakening because it reveals something that has always been true, that even gods are defined by what they oppose. Without mortals, we are unmirrored thought. Without their striving, our eternity means nothing." The hall darkened. Lightning flashed through the clouds, illuminating the faces of immortals who had never known the sensation of doubt, until now. For the first time since the dawn of Olympus, the gods felt something stir within them, the faint, unwelcome ache of introspection. In the underworld, the dead began to dream. They dreamed not of release, but of motion, of the slow, rhythmic push of existence. Some began to hum softly in their endless stillness, the faint echo of Sisyphus's meditation rippling through the caverns of eternity. The very order of death trembled. And through it all, Sisyphus climbed. Each repetition was a prayer, not to the gods, but to the act itself. He no longer imagined freedom as release. Freedom, he had learned, was union with necessity. In surrendering to the endless, he had transcended it. The mountain was no longer prison, it was teacher. The stone, no longer punishment, it was companion. He had become, in his ceaseless labor, the philosopher of the infinite. As he neared the summit once more, the air shimmered with a strange luminescence, neither day nor night, but something between. And for the briefest instant, he thought he saw not the top of the mountain, but its reflection, inverted, reaching downward into the abyss. It was as though the heavens themselves had mirrored his motion. Above, below, within, without, all one rhythm, one breath. He placed his palm against the stone and whispered, "The gods will see, one day, that eternity is not power, but process." Then the stone trembled and fell, descending once more into the valley. But this time, when it rolled, it did not echo with futility. It sang, a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the fabric of creation. The song reached Olympus. It reached the underworld. It reached the spaces between stars where even light hesitates. And somewhere in that infinite hum, Zeus closed his eyes. He felt, for the first time, the faint gravity of the mortal condition, the weight of existence pressing gently against his immortal calm. He shuddered. For in that weight, he heard something terrible and beautiful, the sound of understanding. And in that sound, even a god could almost weep. The mountain no longer stood as a boundary between worlds, it had become a breathing thing, alive with memory. Once, it was the symbol of punishment, a perfect reflection of divine cruelty and mortal endurance. But now, beneath the eternal rhythm of Sisyphus's labor, it pulsed with awareness. The stone no longer rolled in silence, its every motion hummed with the quiet resonance of being. The valley below glowed faintly with a dim, unearthly light, as though the borders between life and death had begun to blur. In the beginning, Sisyphus had believed he was alone. For countless ages, he thought himself forgotten, his struggle nothing more than an echo swallowed by endless time. But something had changed. The mountain began to listen. The air itself seemed to respond to his breathing, his exhale stirring wind, his steps shaping the slope beneath his feet. It was as though his repetition had carved meaning into the indifferent fabric of existence. The gods had made him a prisoner of motion, yet he had made that motion his art. Every morning, though time had long ceased to have meaning, he would place his hands upon the cold stone and feel its heartbeat beneath his palms. It was subtle, like the pulse of a sleeping giant, yet undeniable. The stone had learned him. In its unyielding weight, he felt companionship, an unspoken understanding between two eternal beings bound by purpose. He had not spoken aloud for centuries, and yet, in his silence, he began to hear. There was a language deeper than words, one that vibrated through the mountain and the stone, a dialogue of presence, of rhythm. It was not communication as mortals knew it, it was communion. At first, he thought it a trick of his mind, a madness born of solitude. But as he labored, the whispers grew clearer, layered and soft, like water over rock. They were not voices, but impressions. A thought passed through him that was not his own, we are the same, you and I. He paused, his breath slow and even. The stone was motionless beneath his hands, heavy, ancient, endless. Are you speaking to me? He asked, though his lips barely moved. The answer came not in words but in sensation, the faint tremor of understanding. We are bound by the same law. You roll me, and I roll you. You push, and I resist. But in that resistance, we create balance. Without you, I am stillness without form. Without me, you are motion without meaning. Sisyphus felt a strange warmth behind his eyes, not emotion in the mortal sense, but something larger, quieter, deeper. Then we are reflections, he whispered. The hum deepened in agreement. We are the same thought, expressed twice. You are the question. I am the answer. Together, we are the cycle. For the first time in eternity, Sisyphus felt peace, not the peace of release, but of realization. All along, he had thought himself condemned to futility. But futility was a matter of perspective. To the gods, his labor was meaningless. But to the stone, to the universe, it was creation. Each repetition was a heartbeat, a cosmic breath. And above, in the trembling halls of Olympus, the gods began to dream. They dreamed of descent, of touching earth, of feeling weight. Hera awoke one night from a vision of walking barefoot upon mortal soil, her divine feet leaving no trace. Hermes dreamed of silence, of laying down his wings and hearing only his own breathing. Apollo dreamed of imperfection, of a song slightly off-key but filled with yearning. These were not dreams they had chosen, but dreams that found them, born from the rhythm of Sisyphus's endless movement below. Zeus alone resisted. His dreams were storms. In them, the mountain cracked and the stone fell forever, tumbling through the void, breaking the balance of the world. He would awaken with lightning clenched in his fists, his face wet with something he could not name. The other gods would not meet his gaze. Below, Sisyphus's enlightenment deepened. The boundaries between body and world had softened. His skin felt the mountain as though it were his own flesh, the stone's cold surface merging with his pulse. Each ascent felt slower, but not from weariness, from awareness. The act was no longer labor, it was meditation. As he climbed, he began to remember not the life he had lost, but the dream that life had been. He saw his mortal self, the king who had outwitted gods, who had chained death, who had refused the order of the cosmos. He saw that man now as a shadow, a fragment of pride wrapped in fear. That man had sought control. But this Sisyphus, reborn through punishment, sought only to understand. And in understanding, he found something the gods had long forgotten: humility. There was a strange comfort in knowing that the universe owed him nothing. That the stone would never stay at the summit, that the struggle would never end, and that this, precisely, was the meaning of being. To roll, to strive, to fall, to rise again. In the stillness of one eternal dawn, he spoke softly to the stone again. "Do you dream?" "Always," the stone replied within him. "Every motion is a dream of stillness. Every stillness, a dream of motion. I dream through you, and you through me." He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the stone. "Then we are both awake." In the underworld, Hades watched the flow of the dead begin to change. No longer did they drift through his domain like mist without memory. Now, they lingered near the fields of punishment, their hollow eyes reflecting faint light. They no longer feared the endless, they contemplated it. Some began to move in slow, rhythmic patterns, tracing invisible circles in the dust, mimicking Sisyphus's ascent. Hades turned to Persephone, his voice low. "Do you feel it?" She nodded. "Yes. It is as though the boundary between suffering and serenity has thinned." Hades frowned. "If mortals learn to accept punishment as peace, then even death loses meaning. Without meaning, what remains of order?" Persephone looked upward, her eyes soft and distant. "Perhaps a new order," she said. "One not written by fear." He said nothing, but the thought lingered, heavy as the mountain itself. Meanwhile, far above, in the realm where clouds were palaces and lightning was law, Athena watched Sisyphus's movements in silence. She no longer came to him in form, she watched through thought, through wind, through the trembling rhythm of the mountain. She began to see what he had become, not defiant, not broken, but something transcendent. He had found the still point within the wheel. She turned to Zeus. "Father," she said quietly, "perhaps the lesson was not his to learn, but ours." Zeus did not answer. His gaze was fixed on the horizon where Olympus touched eternity. The clouds below shimmered faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the mortal's motion. "He unravels the nature of divine punishment," Zeus murmured. "He turns it into wisdom. If every mortal learns this, the fear that binds them will vanish. Without fear, there can be no obedience. Without obedience, what becomes of us?" Athena's voice was gentle, but unyielding. "Perhaps gods who rely on obedience are not gods at all, but tyrants of the mind. You gave him eternity to suffer. He made eternity his teacher. Perhaps divinity is not in power, but in perception." Zeus's jaw tightened. The storm behind his eyes flickered with uncertainty. "You would see Olympus humbled before a man?" "No," she said softly. "I would see Olympus learn what man has always known, that even gods are part of the same stone." Her words echoed through the halls long after she left. And though Zeus did not speak again that night, the lightning that had once roared with certainty now shimmered faintly, as though unsure of its own illumination. Down below, the mountain continued its quiet breathing. The stars seemed to lean closer, drawn by the silent rhythm. Even the wind had grown reverent, whispering softly through the stones as if repeating a forgotten prayer. Sisyphus rolled the stone higher and higher, his body steady, his mind quiet. When it reached its peak, it trembled, not from exhaustion, but from awareness. The stone seemed to hesitate, as though reluctant to fall. For the first time, Sisyphus placed his hand upon it and smiled. "Go," he whispered. "Return to your place. The cycle must continue." And as it rolled downward, it sang, not with sorrow, but with understanding. The gods listened. The dead listened. The universe, vast and indifferent, listened. And for the first time in the history of eternity, the act of punishment had become a hymn. The mountain had always stood as the unmovable axis of the world, a silent testament to divine punishment. But now, something deeper stirred within it. Its foundations, once cold and ancient, began to tremble not with destruction, but with awareness. Sisyphus, through the ceaseless rhythm of his labor, had awakened something older than the gods, a pulse that predated Olympus itself. The universe was beginning to remember its own breath. At first, the change was subtle. The wind moved differently, circling in long, meditative spirals rather than erratic gusts. The stones along the slope shimmered faintly, not with light, but with memory. It was as if each grain of sand, each crack in the mountain's face, held a fragment of Sisyphus's reflection. The punishment that had once defined him now defined everything. The gods had sought to isolate him, yet through isolation, he had become the echo of all things. He pushed the stone upward again, each step perfectly measured, his muscles fluid, his breath silent and steady. There was no longer any effort, only movement, a seamless flow between self and world. He had become like the tide, constant, inevitable, infinite. And within that flow, he sensed something vast beginning to open. The stone spoke again, though not in words. It vibrated softly beneath his palms, sending slow waves of thought through his body. "We are nearing the heart of stillness," it seemed to say. He nodded, though no voice answered. His consciousness no longer belonged to him alone. He felt himself dissolving, not into death, but into a vast unity. The mountain, the sky, the stone, even the gods watching from their luminous thrones, all were part of one unending pulse. Existence itself was the rolling of the stone. For the first time, he wondered if this was what the gods had feared, not rebellion, but revelation. That in endless repetition, a mortal might glimpse the true face of eternity and find it not divine, but familiar. Above him, Olympus trembled. The marble palaces flickered, not from storm or rage, but from uncertainty. The gods were beginning to fade, not because they were dying, but because they were being remembered differently. Their forms, once radiant and distinct, blurred into the shimmering air, becoming archetypes rather than beings. They were dissolving back into the collective imagination that had birthed them. Athena stood on the edge of the clouds, watching the horizon fade. "He has done it," she murmured. "He has turned eternity into thought." Hermes appeared beside her, wings silent, his gaze fixed upon the mortal below. "And in doing so, he has freed us from ourselves." The gods were never meant to last forever, only as long as men needed them. Athena closed her eyes. Then the age of gods ends with understanding, not rebellion. "Perhaps," Hermes replied softly. "Perhaps it ends with a whisper, not thunder." Meanwhile, Sisyphus reached the summit once more. The stone rested before him, quivering with something that was neither fatigue nor resistance. The air shimmered, and for the first time since his punishment began, the summit seemed to extend beyond sight, not an end, but a horizon that curved inward, infinite and self-reflecting. He placed both hands upon the stone. "This is where you fall," he said gently. "This is where I descend." But the stone did not move. Instead, it pulsed, once, twice, and then spoke through him, its voice slow as creation, "We need not fall if we have understood the motion." He hesitated, his breath stilling in his chest. "What do you mean?" "The purpose was never ascent nor descent," the stone said. "It was awareness. Now you see both sides. You have reached the center of the cycle. There is no punishment here, only pattern. You may rest, if you wish." He looked down the mountain slope. The valley stretched endlessly, but it no longer seemed empty. In its depths shimmered faint lights, memories of the dead, dreams of the living, fragments of gods fading into thought. He understood now that everything that had ever existed was bound by the same rhythm. Creation and destruction were not opposites, they were breaths of the same eternal act. He closed his eyes and smiled. "Then there is no escape," he whispered, "but neither is there despair." The stone glowed faintly, its voice now soft and distant. "You have found meaning where the gods saw none. That is the secret they feared." And with that, it began to roll, not down the mountain, but inward, as though the world itself folded into the stone. Sisyphus followed, and the ground beneath his feet dissolved into light. The gods felt the pull of that light. Zeus rose from his throne, lightning trembling in his hands. "He draws the cosmos inward," he thundered. "He unweaves the order we created." Athena met his gaze. "No," she said quietly. "He reveals the order that was always there, one you mistook for obedience." But Zeus would not listen. He hurled his lightning toward the mortal world, and yet when it struck the mountain, it did not destroy. It became part of the light, absorbed, softened, transmuted. Power itself had found surrender. The heavens dimmed. The constellations shifted, no longer the proud symbols of divine rule but quiet reflections of endless motion, 1,000 stones rolling across the void. Time lost its edges. The past and future folded into one slow, luminous present. In the heart of that stillness, Sisyphus opened his eyes. He stood not on a mountain, nor in a valley, but in a vast expanse of calm, a field of infinite reflection, where each breath echoed across eternity. The stone was beside him, smaller now, glowing like a star held close. "Are we free?" he asked softly. The stone pulsed with light. "There is no freedom without form, and no form without limit. You are not free of the cycle, you are the cycle." He smiled faintly. "Then I am content." The stone's light deepened, filling the air around him. "Then the gods may sleep." And indeed, far above, Olympus fell silent. The thrones turned to mist, the marble dissolved into cloud, and the voices that had once ruled heaven faded into memory. The gods became thought, immortal still, but in a quieter way. They lived now in human imagination, in dreams, in the whisper of thunder, in the reflection of sunlight on still water. They were no longer rulers, but symbols of a truth too vast to name. Sisyphus closed his eyes once more. He felt no burden now, no struggle. The act remained, the push, the ascent, but it was effortless, an eternal meditation. He rolled not the stone of punishment, but the wheel of existence. Every motion was a prayer, every repetition, a heartbeat of the cosmos. He understood now what the gods never had, that the meaning of eternity was not found in escape, but in participation. To exist was to move, to return, to begin again, endlessly, beautifully, knowingly. Far below, the dead had begun to hum again. Their murmurs formed a soft, harmonic resonance that spread through the underworld like the breathing of the universe. Persephone walked among them, her face calm. "Listen," she said, "even the punished have learned to dream." Hades stood beside her, his eyes shadowed. Then perhaps punishment was never meant to end suffering, he said. Perhaps it was meant to awaken understanding. In the living world, mountains shifted. Rivers carved new paths. Mortals, in their dreams, saw flashes of a man and his stone, not as torment, but as serenity. Some woke with tears they did not understand. Others awoke smiling, as though they had glimpsed something sacred just before dawn. In that dream, they heard a whisper, "To push the stone is to live. To live is to dream. To dream is to roll forever." And so, the story of Sisyphus did not end. It never could. For the mountain was within all things, in the heart that beats, in the breath that returns, in the endless rising of the sun. His myth was no longer tragedy, but meditation, a quiet truth carried in every rhythm of the world. Above the fading heavens, even Zeus felt it, the stillness within motion, the surrender within power. For the first time, he laid aside his thunderbolt and closed his eyes. The storm dissipated. The wind grew calm. The gods slept, dreaming of the mortal who had rolled a stone until eternity remembered itself. And in the silence that followed, the mountain breathed once more. The stone rested where it began. The cycle continued, not as punishment, but as prayer. In that rhythm, endless, patient, luminous, Sisyphus smiled. For he had learned the secret the gods had long forgotten. That the burden and the freedom are the same. The mountain is quiet now. Its slopes, once sharp with punishment and echoing with the strain of endless labor, are smooth with memory. The air moves slowly here, as if the wind itself has learned to breathe like Sisyphus, calm, deliberate, eternal. The stone rests at the valley's base, glimmering faintly in the soft light of a dawn that never truly arrives, a perpetual half-glow that holds time in suspension. Nothing stirs except the rhythm of existence itself, the slow inhalation of the cosmos, the exhalation of thought. And somewhere within that rhythm, a voice whispers, not of the gods, nor of the dead, but of the dreamer listening now. For as the tale of Sisyphus draws to a close, the line between story and self begins to blur. You are lying in darkness. The world outside your eyelids fades, and yet, the image of a mountain begins to rise within you. You see him there, a lone figure moving with impossible calm, his bare feet pressing gently into ancient dust. The stone before him gleams softly, like moonlight given form. He leans forward, his palms resting against it, and you realize that his motion, the push, the ascent, mirrors the beating of your heart. It is no longer his mountain. It is yours. The slope beneath you is neither cruel nor kind, it simply is. You feel the weight of the stone, but it is not burden, it is gravity's reminder that you are still here. You push, and the air moves with you. You breathe, and the mountain breathes back. The story has become circular, a dream repeating itself across the boundaries of time. Somewhere, faintly, a voice hums through the stone. Perhaps it is Sisyphus himself. Perhaps it is the echo of thought. We are all rolling, it says. Every breath is ascent. Every silence, descent. The secret is not in the summit, but in the motion that connects both. You begin to understand, not through logic, but through rhythm. The gods were never your masters, they were metaphors for the forces that move unseen within you. Their anger, their punishment, their silence, all of it was the story of human striving, painted upon the canvas of eternity. And Sisyphus, in his solitude, had found the pulse beneath it all, the truth that meaning is not given, it is made, moment by moment, through the act of living itself. The wind rises now, soft and circular. It brushes against your skin like the edge of sleep. You can almost hear the faint rumble of the stone rolling, not downward, but inward, deep into the recesses of your mind. Every push is a thought, every fall a forgetting, every climb a remembering. The stars above the mountain shimmer faintly, though you cannot tell if they are constellations or fragments of the gods' fading dream. Once, they were symbols of divine order, patterns imposed upon chaos. Now they are quiet witnesses, eyes of the universe, unblinking and still. The gods are gone, dissolved into myth and memory, but their silence remains, not absence, but peace. In that silence, Sisyphus stands motionless at the peak. His hands rest lightly on the stone, as if holding the pulse of the cosmos itself. The punishment has long ended, though the motion continues. For there is no ending to the rhythm that creates being, no summit that outlasts the climb. He looks upward, and the sky opens, not with thunder or divine proclamation, but with gentle light. It is not day, not night, but a stillness that transcends both. The air hums with quiet awareness. For a moment, everything, mountain, man, stone, wind, memory, seems to merge into a single presence, vast and intimate. It is here, in this moment, that you sense what he has become. Not a hero. Not a rebel. Not even a man. Sisyphus has become the rhythm itself. And you, listening in stillness, feel that rhythm move through you. It is in your chest, where breath meets silence. It is in your thoughts, drifting like clouds over the mind's horizon. It is in the soft pulse of the world outside, the hum of night, the slow turning of the earth. You are part of the same motion. Somewhere, deep within this silence, another voice speaks, softer, older, more intimate than words. All that you endure, you create. All that you create, you become. The stone is not against you. It is the part of you that remembers to continue. Sisyphus begins to walk again, but there is no urgency in his steps. Each movement is perfect, unhurried, sacred. The stone glides before him, light as thought. The mountain inclines gently, as though bowing to his understanding. He pushes, not to reach an end, but to remain in harmony with the act itself. In that motion lies the peace of all things, the river flowing to the sea, the breath rising and falling, the stars burning and fading in their endless cycle. What once seemed futile now reveals itself as pattern, and what once was punishment becomes creation. The gods, now faint whispers in the ether, look down upon the mountain. Zeus, or the idea that was Zeus, no longer rages. The thunderbolt lies extinguished, and in its place is quiet recognition. The gods see now what they never could before, that their power was never in command, but in reflection. The mortal they condemned had become their teacher. Athena's voice drifts through the wind, wisdom is not in seeing the summit, but in understanding the climb. And from the shadows of the underworld, Hades whispers, death was never an ending, only another ascent. Even the stone hums in approval. To move is to exist. To exist is to awaken. The mountain exhales. The light around it softens into dusk. Sisyphus closes his eyes. For a moment, everything becomes very still, so still that even eternity seems to pause and listen. And in that stillness, you feel it, a quiet pulse deep within your own chest, perfectly aligned with his. It is the rhythm of the stone, the hum of endless persistence, the heartbeat of being. It carries no command, no prophecy, no divine law, only the simple invitation to continue. You realize now that this story was never about gods or punishment. It was about you, about the way you rise each morning, push your own stone, carry your own weight through the hours, knowing it may fall again. And yet, you return. You climb again. You breathe again. That is not futility. That is grace. Sisyphus, too, had learned this grace, the art of serenity within struggle. His enlightenment was not in escaping eternity, but in inhabiting it completely. And as you drift deeper into the rhythm of his motion, you feel the same calm settle within you, the acceptance that life, like the mountain, is not meant to be conquered, only understood. The mountain fades. The stone fades. Even Sisyphus fades, dissolving into the quiet hum of the world. What remains is the rhythm. The same rhythm that moves the tides, that turns the seasons, that draws breath into your lungs and releases it again. It is the rhythm of everything that lives. And so, as you listen, as your thoughts grow heavy and your body sinks deeper into stillness, you begin to feel the comfort of that eternal motion, not as labor, but as belonging. The stone rolls softly within you, and you let it. The mountain stretches infinitely ahead, but it no longer feels like burden. It feels like home. You are no longer pushing against the world. You are moving with it. The story of Sisyphus does not end here, because stories that speak truth never end. They dissolve into silence, into sleep, into the breathing of those who remember. His myth continues wherever there is effort, wherever there is hope, wherever there is the quiet, steady pulse of being alive. You take one last breath, deep, calm, full of that same cosmic rhythm. Somewhere, in the spaces between dream and wakefulness, you hear the faint sound of stone rolling softly against earth. The sound is steady, peaceful, eternal. It is not struggle. It is not punishment. It is the sound of life continuing. And as it fades, you realize you are already part of it, drifting, breathing, rolling gently toward the horizon of sleep. The mountain waits. The stone rests. The world breathes. And all is well.